What's going on, guys? I'm WrestleRant Graham G.S. Matthews here today to talk about Dark Side of the Ring, Season 6, Episode 2, Ludvig Borga, Hellraiser from Helsinki. Now, the first episode of the season, I covered it last week here on the channel, so if you missed it, please go back and check it out. It was the Mick Foley Hell in the Cell episode, talking about his Hell in the Cell match with The Undertaker back from 1998. A story a lot of people are familiar with and didn't really give me any new information. As a longtime wrestling fan, really wasn't anything new or out of the ordinary, but it was an enjoyable watch for the first episode of the new season. This episode, the second episode of the sixth season, was a lot of new information. As someone who wasn't really familiar with Ludvig Borga at all, outside of the name itself, just knowing that he had a short stint in WWE back in the 90s, that was really all that I knew about Borga. Aside from the stuff I had heard from stories and stuff like that, this was a fascinating watch for a terrible fucking person for sure. But a lot of the stuff that he had done over the course of his life and had tried out before wrestling, outside of wrestling, it was quite the interesting watch, to say the least. So check out new episodes every single Tuesday on Vice, 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Let's get into this episode here. They open it up just talking about very briefly why he would be featured on this show, because he was involved in WWE for a very short stint, like I said earlier, back in 1993. They mentioned that he debuted in WWE in 1993, and he was billed from Finland, which is actually where he was from, I believe, in real life. And they talked about how Vince had an obsession with foreign heels. And we've seen that ever since. Not only back in the 90s and the 80s and when they had, Sergeant Slaughter become an Iraqi sympathizer at one point going into the WrestleMania match with Hulk Hogan back in the day, Rusev in recent years, Umaga in the mid-2000s, among many, many, many other heels, and a lot of which went on to amount to nothing. Vladimir Kozlov comes to mind. Vince loved his foreign heels, and Borga was no exception. They even talked about very briefly how he ended Tatanka's 2-year undefeated streak in singles competition in WWE. I wasn't sure if they would mention that or not. I think that's probably what he's most known for during his very brief period in WWE. And they actually had Tatanka on the show to talk about that. And when they asked Tatanka here, in retrospect, maybe at the time you probably thought it was a fine idea and he wasn't really in a position to say, no, I don't want to lose to Borga of all people. But they asked Tatanka now, in retrospect, was Borga the right guy for that spot, to have beaten your undefeated streak? And Tatanka said no. No, he was not. They obviously ended up doing nothing with him in WWE, and it was kind of a waste of a win, if he's being honest. And they talked about, and when I say I'm talking about Jim Cornette, Jim Ross, among many other people that they interviewed for this episode. No one wanted to work with the guy. He was a piece of shit, had a bad attitude. He had an SS tattoo, a Nazi-esque tattoo on his leg, which I believe was like Hitler's army or whatever it was. Not like a typical swastika like on his leg, but like a Nazi-inspired tattoo. And that's exactly what it was. It wasn't like intended for the character. It wasn't even shown on television. No one even knew it existed. And Jim Ross, who did not have a say, I believe, in hiring anyone at that point because he had just debuted in WWE in 93 as a commentator, he was like, yeah, I'm glad I wasn't in charge of that one. Not that they dodged the bullet. They really didn't. I mean, they dodged the bullet in getting rid of him as quickly as they did, but he should have never been hired in the first place, he talks about. JR even said, he literally quotes and said, yeah, the company, not really him himself, I don't believe, but he goes, yeah, they made the mistake of hiring him. They probably shouldn't have done that. So then after quickly recapping his very short WWE run, they go all the way back to the beginning, talking about his very interesting background in Finland, how he came from a broken home. And I'm not going to get into all the details, really just the highlights. But they talk about how he came from a broken home. He called himself the Viking on the streets, got into a lot of street fights. And they brought in someone who actually wrote a book, I believe, on his life, on Borga's life. Not just his wrestling career. This was not like a wrestling historian. This was someone who specialized in writing about Borga himself. And he was really who they interviewed more than anyone on this episode, which I thought was really interesting. And he talked about how Borga got into a lot of street fights, like I said. He was actually influenced by Taxi Driver. And after seeing that movie, he knew that he wanted to become famous, move to the United States, become a big star. So he moved to Los Angeles in 1986, which is where he got married to a woman named Dee Dee, who was interviewed for this episode, actually. And the ex-wives, like the widows of some of these people that they interviewed for these shows, for these episodes of Dark Side of the Ring, never really seemed to come off well. I mean, they obviously married these men for a reason, but at the time, I don't know if they were just overlooking the red flags or whatever it might have been. But She also does not come off great on this episode, really at all. With some of the things that she either overlooked or she didn't really care about or didn't notice until later on. She calls him larger than life, though. And they also talk about how he took horse steroids at one point. He was actually involved in Herb Abrams' UWF. And that was a whole separate episode of Dark Side of the Ring back in like season 3, 4, 5. I think it was like season 3 or 4. That was a whole other fucking episode about Herb Abrams. They also talked about how he worked for New Japan with a boxing gimmick, despite the fact that he never boxed a day in his life. I think he actually lied about that to make that his gimmick in the promotion. They talk about how he got into a fight with Scott Norton that didn't end well. That kind of ended his run in Japan soon after. His wife, Didi, actually decided to divorce him after 3 years. She was with him for 3 fucking years, which I guess it could have been longer, but that seems way too long for someone that seemed like they were off their fucking rocker in Ludvig Borga. He was, and I didn't write down his real name here, but I'm just going to call him obviously that's not his real name in real life. That's his WWE name, but that's just what I'm going to call him here. So when he got to WWE, they ended up hiring him in WWE, back to his WWE stint here. He was actually set to feud Lex Luger, and that's probably also what he's most known for in WWF, was the very brief feud that he had with Luger, when Luger was like the manager of the Lex Express, and he was Mr. All-American, and he was on his way to the top of the card, and all that other sort of stuff in 93, 94. That kind of got derailed. JR said the biggest issue with Borga was that he couldn't connect with the audience. He thought that he could. Not JR, but Borga did. He probably thought, not even probably, he thought he was a way bigger star than he actually was. He was doing acting roles prior to that point, so it's not like people weren't booking him for certain gigs. He got a lot of roles and a lot of promotions, whether it be boxing, MMA, New Japan, WWE, fucking Gladiator in Finland, which I'll get to later on. Among other small acting roles, they actually showed a clip of a show that he was on before he got to WWF, and one of the actors in the show I recognized. I don't know what the show was. I think they said it in the description when they showed it. But I'm like, man, like how many fucking roles did this guy get for someone who clearly had no charisma, at least from what I saw? And they actually talked about, and I thought this was an exclusive to their, because they have like a Dark Side of the Ring podcast that goes up on Wednesdays, I think, that recaps the episodes and talks about stuff not featured on the show. I haven't listened to it, but I've seen clips. I thought this was an exclusive to social media or that podcast, but it wasn't. It was a clip of Cornette, the ex-wife, and maybe someone else, because they actually interviewed his friend for this as well, Borg's longtime friend. I don't know if he wasn't among those that talked about this. Borga had an exit-only tattoo above his ass. Now, I think the implication was, and they kind of said that here, and Cornette's like, what the fuck? And for Cornette to say something, not that Cornette's homophobic, I don't think, but for Cornette to really think that this is awful, I mean, is really saying something for someone who has also been accused of saying some, not so nice things over the years, but Cornette going into how homophobic it was. Like, I think he was so homophobic was Borga, that he had this exit-only tattoo to kind of, and I'm not going to get into the ins and outs, pun intended, of what exactly that means, but you could probably put 2 and 2 together. But that's how homophobic the guy was. Like, why? Like, what's even the point of having that? I thought that was the funniest thing on this entire episode. I saw that clip before watching the episode, and I was dying laughter from, I was dying of laughter from Cornette's comment specifically. Just ridiculous. But anyway, so he got hurt in WWF, and he got fired soon after. It kind of gave him an excuse to get rid of him. It gave WWF an excuse to get rid of this nut job. And then soon after, he signs to the UFC. Again, this guy was like a fucking cat landing on his feet every single time. He would always fall like upward. He would leave one company and then go to a bigger company. So he ended up in UFC. Didn't take it seriously. They talked about he lost in a minute to Randy Couture, and that's not how you pronounce his last name. But I know the name of Randy Couture, whatever the fuck it is. He lost to Randy in a minute, okay? And it did not go well. So they talked about how he got remarried, and the SWAT team invaded their home because he was trafficking illegal substances and weapons. And his first wife was like, they didn't talk to the second wife, I don't think. There was a blonde woman on the show. I don't know who she was, or they mentioned where she was, or who she was and where she was from, but I missed it. But the first wife was I think talking about how, that's not really something I think that he would have been involved in. That kind of surprised me, or something along those lines. It was kind of stupid. But anyway, so because of that, he actually got deported back to Finland. And again, he landed on his feet. He ended up landing a role on the Finnish version, the Finland version of Gladiators. And that was where he was going as the Viking. He recorded a fucking single for some reason. He wrote an autobiography. Really nasty stuff in that autobiography, using very derogatory words and like the N-word and stuff like that. It was pretty bad, apparently, according to what they said here. Then he got into politics. So again, continuing to fall upward. And he actually suggested being aligned or getting involved with a Nazi-inspired party. Again, probably not all that surprising based on the shit they had said about him up to this point. But at that point in the 90s or early 2000s, whenever this was happening exactly, it's like how the fuck did this even happen? They actually relate it to modern day politics with people just believing anything they hear, and that's a whole separate conversation. But I thought that was really interesting they brought that up, because that was also my first thought when I heard about that. Like, you would think anyone involved with a Nazi-related party would not be able to get involved in politics, but clearly we were wrong. Clearly we were all wrong about that. And they make it, suggestions to Donald Trump and stuff like that, not specifically with the Nazi stuff, but again, you can kind of read between the lines there. I thought that was interesting. Anyway, so while he was involved in politics, he did a lot of media interviews, not thinking they would, use the final cut, stuff like that. He actually spoke very offensively, they said, about immigration, and that didn't even really do him in. It was other later issues that actually did him in politics, and he had to resign and all this other sort of stuff. But he had a lot of substance abuse issues as well, and those increased. They recount this incident where he was struggling with his wife over the possession of a gun. And he was also taking pills at the same time, like a lot of pills. And I think it ended up he ended up getting shot. I forgot where, but he ended up shooting himself by accident. And he was also ODing at that point. They actually managed to revive him, but he suffered significant brain damage. So only because of that, not because of all the other shit that he said, I'm sure that didn't help, but not because of the shit that he said leading up to that point, it was really the brain damage that did him in politics. So because of that, he had to resign from Parliament. From there, he got addicted to painkillers, they talked about, and they mentioned how a friend, I don't know if it's a friend or the friend that was interviewed for this episode, had to pick him up from a bar. And he was taking oxycodones and stuff like that. It was just fucking nuts. So then they kind of recap the end, where a friend, I don't know, I think it was that friend, I think it was the same friend, went to go check up on him, and the door was locked. He definitely knew he was in there. And you could open the door, like the door was open, but like the thing was on there, so you could, kind of look in a little bit. He couldn't see him or hear him, whatever. He called his friend, and he could hear his phone going off, but he wasn't picking up the phone, so he was concerned. Called the police break in the apartment house, whatever, and they ended up finding him dead in a chair, laid out after he shot himself. So they talked about like his legacy and what real legacy does this guy leave behind, but they talked about how desperate he was to be like famous and accepted and loved and all this other sort of shit. And the wife, again, they never really come off well on these things. She said at the end here that he had a good side. So this fucking nut job that had like a Nazi tattoo, said a lot of evil, derogatory, disgusting stuff, had a good side. For anyone that was wondering, for anyone that cared, that really wanted to look for the good side in Ludvig Borga, he had a good side, according to his ex-wife. Just so you guys know. I thought that was a really stupid thing to say. I mean, that was her experience. That's her perspective. She was married to the guy for 3 years, so she did divorce him. But, he had a nice side, she said, so I guess we could take her word for it. But in all seriousness, though, I thought this was a really interesting episode for someone specifically that really knew nothing about this stuff outside of the name itself, and the fact that he was involved in some pretty crazy shit. I thought this was a very, very interesting episode. So definitely check it out right now on Vice, Season 6, Episode 2, Ludvig Borga, Hellraiser from Helsinki. And then next week's episode, coming up this Tuesday on Vice, I think it's 10 p.m. Eastern Time, is going to be focusing on Vader. So I'm looking forward to that one. I obviously am much more familiar with Vader than I am Ludvig Borga. But they actually showed clips of him working with Vader, Borga working with Vader, on this episode in Japan. So kind of a segue into next week's episode, which I thought was cool. I doubt they did that on purpose. But anyway, good stuff from Dark Side of the Ring this week. Thank you guys for checking out these reviews. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content, including weekly reviews of Dark Side of the Ring. I reviewed every episode of the show dating back to the first season, 5-6 years ago. And all of my reviews of Dark Side of the Ring are down below in the description box of this video. So if you want to check out all my other Dark Side of the Ring reviews, you can do so. They're all audio, except for now Season 6, we're doing these on video. And I just go off of what they give me on this show. Sometimes I don't always interpret things 100% accurately. I try my best. So if there's a lot of shit they get wrong on these episodes as far as the subjects that I'm not overly familiar with, I apologize. I'm just going off of what I see and just giving you my reaction. But I do enjoy these episodes, and I think you guys will as well. So again, thank you so much for checking out my reviews and my content. I appreciate it. Be sure to also hit the bell button to be notified every single time we upload a new video and every single time we go live here on the channel. Until next time, guys, have an awesome rest of your weekend. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.